All right, so knolling, if you look up the dictionary definition, it's basically the act of organizing a series of objects in a scene in parallel and 90-degree angles. And so what we're going for is a really kind of clerical, sterile, very clean, crisp, perfectly, meticulously organized look. So we don't want things that are spilled. We don't want it to look haphazard. We want it to be very intentional and very poised, I should say. So keep in mind your objects. You want to keep like similar shaped objects kind of near each other. You want to use a lot of repetition. So if you're photographing makeup and you've got them in little containers, organize all your containers in a grid if they're all the same size, and maybe line up all your brushes so that they're all right next to each other. If you're shooting your watercolors, you've got your watercolor palette and you've got all your brushes together so that everything's really organized. If you're doing like a pile of clothes, make sure your shirts are really neatly folded into squares and your shoes are right next to each other. They're not like askew, the laces aren't everywhere. It's very intentional and carefully placed. And it helps to like kind of have your camera on a tripod so that you can look in the viewfinder and see how it's looking and then constantly tweak and look and tweak and look. That way you're getting the best quality photo that you can. And then worst case scenario, if something's just a little bit off, you can always jump it into Photoshop and then get it right into place. Keep in mind the lens that you use. If the lens you're using has a lot of distortion, like the 35mm lens that I'm using on my camera, I need to keep that in mind, and then just make sure in Lightroom when I'm editing that I just get that distortion out and make sure the photo is nice and flat and straight. It helps to turn the grid on your camera. If you're using your phone or your camera, turn the grid on so you can line stuff up and make sure that everything is parallel and you're not photographing things at an angle. If you're using your phone, if you turn on the grid, you've got the little crosshair that you can line up to make sure you're directly above your subject. Using your DSLR is going to be a little trickier, but you'll find a way to make it work with your tripod. Or if you set up on the floor, you can stand above it or stand on a chair above it and just try and get your whole scene. Keep in mind that you can crop if you need to. So if you get your toes in the edge of the photo and you don't want them there, you can crop them out if you're shooting on a nice, plain, easy white backdrop or any kind of solid backdrop that's not going to be too tricky to Photoshop out. So that being said, let's put together a photo. All right, here's a quick shot of what my kitchen looked like while I was working. I have a backdrop set up, which is just like kind of white painted boards on top of some white paper. I put it on top of paper in case I needed to extend the backdrop in Photoshop. This will just make it easier than trying to turn my wood floors into my white wood backdrop. So here is an overhead shot of me putting this to work. I've sped this up so you can see my decision-making process. I like to keep visual weight in mind when I am putting this together. I like to put heavier or darker items along the bottom and then just fill in with lighter colored or smaller objects closer to the top. I also like to put similar items together. You can see all the memory cards are put together, and later I've got a row of batteries all together. I like to change my mind a lot. This is the first time I've tried putting this shot together, so you can see, where I started to where I ended up. It's kind of like a puzzle, just trying to put, a bunch of layouts together until it seems to click just right. Once I'm happy with my placement, I photograph it from overhead, utilizing my camera's viewfinder with the grid option. I take a couple different shots and then pull the images into Lightroom for an edit. So here's my photo in Lightroom, and this is my quick edit for contrast and white balance. I tend to shoot with directional lighting, so it makes the top of my photo lighter than the bottom of my photo, and so I just pull in some graduated filters to even out that lighting. So I pull a darken filter along the top of the image to help bring down those highlights, and then I bring a lighten filter with a little bit of shadow increase along the bottom to help brighten up those dark shadows. And then I'll go ahead and hand paint any trouble spots, any spots that have overexposed areas, or I'll bring in like some brightness on the underexposed areas that are really dark. And then I will go ahead and adjust the lens distortion. So I'm using my 35mm lens, which means it kind of makes it bubble up in the center. And so I adjust my distortion to help flatten out the image. And then actually once I did that, I realized my DSLR looks a little bit crooked. So I go ahead and take this whole image into Photoshop. Here in Photoshop, I lasso right around the DSLR, and then I right click copy. So I've copied what I've lassoed and it's sitting on top of my image. I hit Command T for transform, and then I rotate it just slightly to kind of put it more in line in the image. And then I go through and erase some areas that don't match up, and I use the clone tool to patch it so that it looks seamless. And then I merge the images together and then save it and call it good. I didn't really notice my little copper tubes were getting a little close to the memory cards. If I go in again, I'll probably edit that so that there's a little more breathing room between those. When you're laying your image out, you want to make sure that nothing is touching. You want everything to be close with a good border between them that's consistent throughout your image, but you don't want items to touch because then they kind of become one item, and our goal is to photograph a whole bunch of items all together in one shot, not really like trying to blend them together. So yeah, and then here at the end, I've thrown together a bunch of different images that I was able to take kind of with different themes in mind. So this one is a tea shot. So I kind of had Stash Tea in mind when I was taking this picture. So I included a bunch of shots of their logo, and then some of the ingredients that they use in this particular tea. This is my favorite tea in the whole world. It tastes so good. It's like root beer, basically. It's so sweet and delicious without adding any sugar or anything to it, and I love it. So I made this kind of as like an ode to them and how delicious it is. This is a shot I put together of all my cat's toys. This shot actually took forever because these toys roll away, or my cat likes to walk in and play with her toys while I'm trying to take the picture, and so there's that shot too. This is a picture I put together of all the stuff I take hiking. I go hiking once a week in the spring, summer, and fall with my friend. And so you've got, your water and your sunscreen, bug spray, my watch that tracks my workouts, my shoes, and my snacks. And so I organize those on my table, just kind of showing off my hiking. This is a shot of a bunch of nail polishes. I just picked these few brands because these are kind of the ones I use the most, and I realized I really like sparkly jewel tones. There's no yellow, there's no browns, there's no, orange in here. Pretty much the closest I have to a warm color is the red. But yeah, I thought that made kind of a nice image, and I used my penny tile backdrop, which kind of emulated a bathroom feel, and I feel like that tied in really well with that. And then this is a shot of all the Choco Love products that I shoot for them, and so I put together this shot, putting them all in one frame and showing off each of the different flavors and everything that they offer. And so this was for a paper shoot, but I think it turned out really, really nice, and I did this on the paper backdrop. So if you want to do a shot on white, the white banner paper is excellent for this. There was a seam right down the center kind of going horizontal, but you can't tell because I photoshopped it out. So feel free to do whatever inspires you for your class project. There's tons of different ideas here, and then I've got a bunch of my Pinterest board that you can go through, or you can just, if you have an idea along the way, feel free to just pursue that. And I can't wait to see what you create.